Palace House. This is where most of the action takes place. MPs' offices are based here, their staffers too, and journalists all floating around. But there's only been one group that's been there for every sitting, every hour of this bill committee on the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill. Yet, you guessed it, it's us, free leaseholders. And we've been petitioning ministers, former ministers, MPs, briefing journalists, and petitioning for amendments to improve the bill. And in the coming weeks, we will be doing the Save the Bill video series with practical policies and amendments to improve the bill, to stop this asset class in ordinary people's homes going forward, but most importantly, giving those of us already trapped control and autonomy in our homes.
Save the Bill, Episode 1. Battling the ground rent Grazers.
War. Our story starts at the Bill Committee with the freeholder lobby giving evidence.
Good afternoon, my name is Jack Spearman, I'm from the Residential Freehold Association. We're a representative organisation for the UK's largest professional freeholders.
I trust you're aware of the statement from the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association that said none of our members have expressed any concerns with us about proposed changes to rules affecting leasehold and ground rents. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I know where that came from.
It came from the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association.
I would advise you to go and ask them again.
That was the first clue we got that the PLSA, the trade body for pension funds, had done a U-turn on ground rents. This was a statement they made just 4 months ago.
Pension funds' aggregate allocation to all types of property, including commercial as well as residential, accounts for 4% of all pension holdings. None of our members have expressed any concerns with us about proposed changes to rules affecting leasehold and ground rents.
That statement from the PLSA wasn't something that they just fired off without thinking to shut up a bunch of angry activists. It was their considered position, signed off at the highest level. I should know, because I'm the person that they actually gave that statement to. It was a result of weeks, over a month, of phone calls, emails to their press team to get it ready. In fact, they didn't even give it to me until the higher-ups had come back from holiday. But now the organisation has submitted a whole 3-page document to government arguing the very opposite.
A policy change that would cap ground rents would directly affect pension funds who bought assets on certain terms and in good faith. For existing investors, capping ground rents could lead to insolvency, which would in turn create residual problems for leaseholders. Without compensation, savers within pension schemes are at risk.
Pension experts were not impressed.
It's all empty phrasing, numbers thrown around, and not a single source to tell us where their data come from. It's unusual, I think, for a professional body to be so short on actual hard facts. And that was the most striking thing about the PLSA submission, frankly.
It's not just the content of the new PLSA statement that seems dodgy. The way it was released and the whole Astroturfing campaign that followed were clearly orchestrated. The PLSA sneaked out their submission just hours before the government's ground rents consultation closed, the night before the RFA were due to give evidence to the Bill Committee. The PLSA didn't do a press release. Instead, they buried the letter in a section full of policy documents, where it sat like a landmine, waiting to explode in the face of anyone like Barry Gardner, who might dare to challenge Project Fear and the myth of the poverty-stricken pensioner. And that's exactly what happened.
The committee will meet again on Tuesday to begin line-by-line scrutiny of this bill. Can I invite the government whip to move the adjournment?
I beg to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
Thank you very much. The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
Shortly after the committee rose for the day, a post on LinkedIn went viral among sector professionals. The author? Head of legal from Homeground, the company managing the ground rents for the £1.6 billion freehold fund Long Harbour, a member of the Residential Freehold Association. No wonder then that he had the link to that hidden PLSA submission. Immediately, a horde of industry insiders were piling in on Barry Gardner MP. One of the angry posters was a Mr. Steve Wybrow. Remember that name for later. That same evening, The Guardian ran a story on the Bill Committee featuring Mr. Gardner versus the RFA. 1 minute, the PLSA statement from September, our members aren't worried about ground rents was there. The next, poof, it's been airbrushed out of existence. Who leaned on The Guardian? A few days later, suddenly, a new grassroots group emerges. Its name? Pensioners for Ground Rent Association. But there's no website, no Twitter, no members that we could find. The spokesperson though, yeah, you guessed it, is a Steve Wybrow. But at 46, he's hardly a pensioner. But you go on LinkedIn, his CV is glowing. He spent his whole career in ground rents and residential freeholds. He's worked for the Grosvenor Estate and the Regis Group, a member of the Residential Freehold Association. Fortunately, most journalists saw through this little stunt and didn't accept a press release coming from a PR agency that no real grassroots group could ever afford. But all this raises the question, why are the PLSA and the freeholder lobby so desperate to hold on to an asset class that everyone knows is just a tiny fraction of total pension fund portfolios?
We are young, we run green, we got tea, nice and clean, see our friends, see the sights.
The answer lies in a couple of 21st century trends. First is a massive change in pension fund ownership. Pensioners are living far longer. The companies who used to employ all these retirees started to worry they might not earn enough to go on and on paying the pensions they had promised. So they looked around for someone to take their pension schemes off their hands. Up stepped some of the biggest insurance and investment funds in the world. Pension scheme buy-ins and buyouts became a huge business. Why would these funds take on all that risk, you ask? That brings us to the second trend. Millions of leasehold flats being built with a new kind of ground rent that rose with inflation or doubled every 10, 15 years. Aha, thought the big fund managers. Those escalating ground rents are the perfect investment to match our new pension obligations.
From about 1997, the government determined that employees were losing out in high inflation, and they insisted that employers begin to build into their pension promises some element that of the pension and payment would rise with inflation. There are very, very few secure investments that fund managers could buy that would guarantee that it would match those rises in inflation. Government bonds can head south, they can collapse, same thing with equities, as we know. We've seen stock markets crash. However, ground rents that are pegged to move only in line with inflation, or which are pegged, for example, to double, say, every 10 years, are going to give you the income, the extra income you need to match that unique promise that employers have had to make.
If those investment funds lose the ground rent income that so beautifully matches to their obligations, will Granny be hurt?
Under a 2004 law, any sponsor of a defined benefit pension scheme who is solvent and not in an insolvency arrangement has to pay all promised pension obligations in full and on time. There's no wiggling out of it. And so these fund managers who have taken on responsibility for paying these defined benefit pensions, they're the ones who are going to have to find the extra cash if it is needed, not the recipients of the pensions, the grannies and granddads who have no other income after a very hard working life.
What if they go bust? They're not going to be able to get the money to pay the pensioners, are they?
The odds of one of these companies becoming insolvent is minuscule. These companies have huge portfolios worth billions of pounds, billions of dollars in assets invested in bonds, equities, infrastructure all around the world. The percentage of assets and the percentage of income that comes from ground rents in Britain is minuscule. Get the microscope out. You won't even spot it.
So the claim that removing financial value out of ground rents will ruin pensioners is a myth, plain and simple. So let's put that one to bed, shall we? But it's true. There will be some losers. Those specialist investment firms that spent a lot of their time, money and energies gobbling up freeholds and ground rents. Just give you two examples, Time Freehold Fund and the Schroders-backed Ground Rents Income Fund PLC. But these freehold investment funds were already clobbered by the Building Safety Act 2022 because the government and Michael Gove forced them to start putting their hands in their pockets to pay for fire safety defects, or at least some fire safety defects on their estates. Some of them are already considering leaving the market altogether because of those new financial liabilities they didn't like. And on ground rents, they can't be complaining because they've been on notice for years on this. Sajid Javid, then the Housing Secretary in 2017, committed to peppercorn ground rents. And in 2019, the Conservatives made it a key manifesto commitment.
This is not coming out of the blue. I mean, I think you can, depending on where you sort of draw the line, there has been debate about this for 20 years in the UK political system. It's been part of political planning and manifestos for some time. And another part of this, and I think this is really important, that when freeholders say, oh, we signed these contracts in good faith, we couldn't see this coming. Honestly, look, all you have to do is you go on Google, you find a prospectus for a ground rent investment. Even if you go to some of the listed ground rent funds and how they communicate with investment, look, regulatory risk, legal risk is top of the line in terms of these funds, because investors have known for a long time that these contracts were very controversial, in particular the sort of modern ground rent, which are either doubling or linked to RPI. So look, this is disingenuous. They knew that something like this was coming. Of course, they're now fighting back. I don't kind of begrudge them that, but it's very disingenuous for them to say sort of, oh, this is sort of a big surprise for us and feel very wronged by that. I simply don't buy that.
The freeholder lobby aren't going down without a fight. Beyond the poverty-stricken pensioner angle, there's plenty of others for them to be pushing. Indeed, at the Bill Committee, they complained of property rights being infringed and a socialist wealth grab that no Tory government should ever pursue.
Is it right to say that this bill is a wealth transfer from rich freeholders to rich leaseholders? This is just moving money between rich people primarily, isn't it?
No, not every leaseholder in London is rich by any means. If you're buying a flat at 300,000 in London, that will make you rich by the sound of someone in Peterlee, but I don't think a young couple buying a flat for 300,000 would meet the Daily Telegraph's definition of the rich.
Okay. The government's own statement is as follows, that it noted that the pension funds held less than 1% of assets in residential property, and it added that any hit to pension funds would be within normal investment and depreciation tolerances.
You seem to be suggesting that it's okay to steal the chocolate bar from the shop because it's only 1% or 2% of the stock. It's still not okay.
Nonsense.
The second thing I would say is that...
Sorry, justify the word steal. I would say the word steal is justified when there is no service being provided and yet you're charging for it, even if it is only a chocolate bar.
Okay, I've got news for you, Mr. Spearman. There is no chocolate bar, because a chocolate bar would be a good or a service that would be worth paying for. Now here, I don't get anything worth paying for. I have ground rent of £1,500 a year. In 4 years' time, it will double to £3,000. Now, what do I get for that? Certainly not repairs, which I'm paying also a service charge for. That's been here for 6 months or so, dripping into this disgusting bucket. And there is an estate down the road from mine, same freeholder, peppercorn ground rent. Their estate is ever so much better managed than mine, so I'm getting absolutely nothing for my ground rent. It is extortion. What it is, Mr. Spearman, is the equivalent of having somebody outside the sweet shop with a baseball bat attacking me when I come out and saying, you shop there, now pay me protection money.
As an economist, Harry, I think a ground rent is probably one of the best examples we come across of so-called rent seeking, where if I'm rent seeking, I can extract value for someone else without adding any value, right? We know that this is true because the freeholders themselves say that they add no value for the ground rents that they extract, right? And I think the problem we have here, what we're going to discuss today, is that if I have an asset, a ground rent that extracts value from you without adding any value, which is what a ground rent is, and if the value of that asset goes up over time, either let's say doubles or it's linked to RPI, and as that asset value goes up, the value of your flat on which this asset derives goes down. Look, I have a problem. This is the issue in a nutshell. It's perfectly reasonable, legally sound, in my view, for a government to intervene in that contract, because otherwise, the imbalance here is just so obvious.
So these freeholders are saying that, Parliament and government have no right basically getting involved with existing contracts freely entered into by two private parties. What do you say to that?
Well, I think we've already talked about why actually with a rent-seeking asset, the government might actually have good recourse to intervene. But even if you look at the current leasehold contracts such as they are now, there's a very recent precedent, right? During the building safety and cladding scandal, the government effectively shifted the liability for these costs from the leaseholder as part of the service charge over to the building owner. And the reason the government did that was to align incentives, right? To give the building owners the correct incentives to actually do something. Because if they hadn't done that, the only incentive the building owner have, if there's a fire safety issue or something like that, is just to send a leaseholder bill of 150 grand. If they don't pay, they forfeit the flat. And obviously a government can't just sit back and let that happen. With the building safety crisis, there's a precedent, right? And the freeholders, I don't know whether they thought about suing for a loss of property right in the context of that case or not, but they didn't do it. And, in a way, I think with the ground rent, they're going to have to accept change as well.
For those of you who've got this far, thanks for watching. We've been able to show that ground rent is for absolutely nothing. It's pure profit to freeholder landlords. And Granny, well, she's a red herring. Now, we can all wallow in the so-called complexities of public policy and ground rent reform. That's kind of what we've been trying to do here for the last 15, 16 minutes. But the government has a really clear moral decision to make. Does it side with voters? And does it side with leaseholders who did everything right? Everything that successive Conservative governments asked them to do. To work hard, to save up, to buy a home of their own for them and their family. Or does government side with faceless freeholders who took a gamble, buying a toxic asset that they should never have been buying into in the first place? Rishi Sunak, Michael Gove, all other parliamentarians across these two houses of parliament, when you come to look at this bill, you know there's only one clear answer.
I think that leasehold should be killed off. I also think leasehold is on occasion an absolute magnet for sharks and other wretched creatures who disgrace our society in the good name of capitalism. I think it was Edward Buchan, many before I was born, and well, before at least some of you were born, who remarked about the unacceptable face of capitalism when companies behave very badly. And we do see that in leasehold, the companies who had doubling ground rents until a property was worthless, the companies who do pursue people for forfeiture over tiny bills. There are, bluntly, if I'm allowed unparliamentary language, which I think I am, but you're not, there are bastards out there, and your job is to construct the law to constrain those people who have bastard tendencies. And leasehold does not do that.
War. They sent you to do it. Sweat.